Welcome to another episode of Gov Tech Today. I'm Russell Lowery.
And I'm Jen Saha.
And together we try and bridge the gap between .com and .gov. With us today is a experienced developer, a real old school coder with GitLab. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the development environment and what's happening in coding and development world, particularly with an emphasis on coding in state government, which I'm going to confess, Joel, I did a Hello World Python class maybe 20 years ago, and that was my last direct interaction with coding. So I'm definitely the newbie novice on this call. So you're going to take us through that if that's all right.
Sounds good. Yeah, Russell, I'd love to say not much has changed in the last 20 years, but I can't say that at all.
All right. So why don't you give me and our audience a little background on your coding experience? What's your background?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I've been doing this a while, and as such, I started out early on. Well, it turns out, coding's all about creating things. I found out early on that I'm better at breaking things than creating them. And so I started my time in the QA world and a lot of testing. But testing became the hotbed of automation back, when I started doing this. And so I started writing a lot of code, and that led me into understanding the product well, which led me into more writing code for product. And then as I worked my way over into more sales consulting type avenues, I found myself writing applications to run on some of these platforms that we were creating. And so it's been an evolutionary journey through a lot of different languages. But at the end of the day, somewhere around here, I can find probably about 500,000 lines of code.
Wow.
Accrued
500,000 lines of code in several different languages over decades worth of experience. You've seen a lot.
A few things, yeah.
At some point, I mean, you're coding and you're writing and you're seeing the world change. What prompted you just mentioned several different switches in your career from starting at coding and quality assurance. Was it were you purposeful in skipping, or did it related to your talent? Give us a little picture of how your career evolved.
I'd love to say it was all intentional. The reality was it was opportunity driven. And for the most part, it was, hey, you've gotten to this point, these things. Can you step in for somebody over here? And poof, you're in sales. Like, those are the kind of things that happened over the years that led me from a path from QA through development to product management and out to field work. It was really an opportunity driven thing. However, introduction of various processes or languages or shifts in projects would mandate that, okay, you were using this language, now we're going to have to use this one because the technology is different, right? And here's the emergence of Agile as a real hot button process issue. Okay, how do you better support that? Are these the languages that are even going to work for that? Or what kind of coding requirements do we have now? Is anything changing? Those really led me on an interesting journey to how we get to today.
Well, AI is the hot topic, and certainly in our world in Sacramento, there's hearings and agencies are implementing and talking about it constantly. What's your with your 500,000 lines of code experience behind you? Has there been an eye-opening moment with the interaction between AI and your coding that gives you an impression? Are we in hype mode, or is this something we need to pay attention
to? The answer is both. So I think right now everybody's trying to get on the hype train, right? So the reality is, yes, AI is everywhere. Is everybody doing it well? No. Is it mature yet? No, by far no. But this is one of those groundbreaking times in history, in my opinion. Like, if I look back at my career, there's a few key moments of like, okay, the .com era came to fruition as I was starting my career. And my goodness, if you were part of that early stage, right, where everybody was getting online and getting those websites really growing and we're going to come out on top. And then the invention of the iPhone and the smartphone, and so that era came to fruition. Okay, now everything's changing again, and this feels like one of those moments where AI is stepping into the picture and saying, we're about to redefine how you work. Right? You may have researched something one way before the web, but you're not doing it any other way now, are you? And so what's the chances of just picking up your phone and saying, okay, I'm going to go quick look for something? You couldn't have done that before maybe 2005 or so with any real repeatability. Um, where we are with AI now, it's game changing stuff, and we're going to see a dramatic shift over the next couple of years, I should say, in how we're defining the effort to create code, the effort to understand somebody else's code, to refactor code into memory safety or modern languages or modern applications, right? We're at the precipice of that change, and we're just now starting to see the first metrics come back saying, yes, this is paying off, even in the early stages from an efficiency perspective.
I have a question, Jen. When I hear that, alarm bells go off in my head. Is this an issue where, sure, this is going to work in the private sector, and we six-figure salaries and people throwing, dollar figures at programmers and AI, dollars flowing to venture capitalists paying for taking over the world. Is this relevant for state government, or is the state of California using technology and developing in this way?
I mean, absolutely. It's happening everywhere already, which is exciting. But yeah, there are quite a few state departments, even in the state of California, where they are doing DevSecOps. They are developing systems and software by themselves with tools like GitLab to help their guidance, but also along the lines of using GitLab for project tracking. Joel mentioned it, but agile development is something that, and Joel, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head in the beginning of this when you said, we're still coding the same way we were many decades ago. And that aligns with a lot of our themes in government, where we're still doing things the same way. I had someone the other day that's trying to hire a COBOL programmer in their state department. And I was like, oh my, that should be hard to find. Let me call anyone over the age of 50 and see if they're available to help us with this. But Agile is happening. Internal development is happening all over government. And, part of it, Joel, what I'm interested in from your time at GitLab and using these types of tools, there really is sort of a cult following among developers that are, super into GitLab and using all the tools and the security benefits that it has to offer. Can you talk a little about that and sort of the trends that you're seeing as they relate to adoption of these types of tools?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, that's part of what brought me here, right? This culture and just the quirkiness of what GitLab was when I joined, and there were about 150 of us when I joined. So what a journey it's been, right, over the last 6.5 years. But I think the interesting thing there is it gave an alternative to a lot of what was already in the market, right? It provided something a little different. Early on, had kind of a scary logo, so we won't talk about that. But that was an interesting component of who we were in the very early days. Um, I think what's most interesting is what it started as and what it's become, right? So it started out as that quirky tool, that alternative tool, that self-hosted, free, open source, open core, super transparent, right? All the right things that drew developers in. And it really started from just kind of taking source code and saying, well, we should put automation with this. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? So at the time, everything was a separate slice of the pie. And GitLab said, I think we should become the pie. We should become the whole pan, right? And so we just started expanding, and you started seeing things like security come into play, and then agile management come into play. And then, well, let's look into operations and how do we extend this out? And so it keeps growing to the point where it's that comprehensive platform platform now. And yes, it's become that hub for security, very broadly applied. And what's interesting, Russell, to your point about AI, is now it allows us to take an objective look, step back, look at that top level view and say, okay, across all of the SDLC, all of the software development lifecycle, where do we inject AI for the biggest payback? And it turns out the whole thing. Because if you speed up one thing like source code creation, you're cranking out code and just throwing it against the wall to somebody like me who is on the test side now going, what do I do with this? It's coming so fast. But I don't have my AI enabled for my step of the process, right? So now AI test generation is on the table. Well, now how do I document the changes? How about AI-driven documentation creation? Oh, okay, that works. That's good. Okay, what's the next barrier? And you start thinking about it comprehensively. And so I think, from the perspective of the scrappy startup to the transparent open source platform into the AI powered open source platform, right? This is where things are really going to start getting interesting, because the efficiencies, the ability to tie the production of code to the reduction of technical debt that a lot of agencies are sitting on, the ability to crank out more secure code or refactor those legacy C applications that have been running for as much as 50 years now into a modern language to eliminate an entire class of vulnerabilities. Like, this is all on the table now. A
Can
year
I drill
ago, I
down
wouldn't
on
have
it?
said that.
Let me drill down on that a little bit, Joel. Because some of that C++ or that Cobalt language that Jen was talking about, and then combining that with what I heard you say about AI, the state faces, maybe similar to the private sector, but we have a technical knowledge gap. Where we have a lot of vacancies where we're trying to hire people, and it's really hard to attract talent. So if I'm looking at some old Cobalt code and I'm trying to understand what it is and get it to sync with more modern language, is AI helping there? Have you had any experience with that? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so COBOL's the unique use case because of its age and because of the mainframe and because of what we do with COBOL, right? That is an interesting approach to the question. But if we just take a step back from that into just any legacy language, so whether that's C or COBOL or anything else, the idea of moving it forward it's a unique challenge, right? A lot of this code's been running the same way for decades, and it's been running well. So that's the thing. This is reliable code. The problem is, if you look at something like C, around 70% of all vulnerabilities are attributable to C and the way that memory is managed. Like, this is a big deal. Can we get away from that and knock out 70% of the ability to get a hack or a breach on your watch? Boy, that sounds great. How do you prioritize that in the age of innovation, in the age of constituent services, in the age of I need to get this to market right now? It's tough. And what I love about AI is I think it's opening the door to us being able to do more within that space and say, yeah, you know what? I can probably refactor this application in 15 minutes now. It used to be probably a 2-month type of initiative, right? Like, we're at the edge of that, and I'm watching these things come to the market right now. It's going to be some game-changing stuff that allows us to get rid of some of those technical anchors that have held us in place for decades and possibly vault us forward. Now, on the skills side, the benefit is, yes, you're right. We have a huge skills gap problem. And I heard you mention 6 figures earlier. I saw an article this week where the big guys are paying 7 figures for the right AI talent now. So let that one sink in. If you're Google, if you're Meta, if you're one of those, there's offers out there that are breathtaking. So knowing that that's happening, the government's in a tight spot to be able to compete. And as such, they're going to need all the efficiencies they can get. I think what AI is helping do is lower the barrier to technical creation. And the idea that as AI matures and as something like a GitLab platform, for instance, continues to gain efficiencies across the process, you'll see more people who may not necessarily have the full set of capabilities today. Like, they're not fully skilled for software creation, be able to dip their toe in the water and say, you know what, I can do this with a little AI assistance and maybe a few checkpoints. I can do this now. As we lower that barrier to entry, it enables us to find more people and work more efficiently. So I'm hoping all that works hand in hand in order to help us deliver more code for all of the constituents that are looking for it.
Can you explain it to me as a concrete example, that refactoring work that you talked about in a C environment from months to minutes? I'm really curious. What does that give me? Paint that picture for me. I'm in Department of Social Services. I have 40 different mechanisms and programs and legacy systems going back 50 years.
Yeah.
What is refactoring, and how would GitLab and AI work together to give me to refactor? What is that? How would that work?
Yeah, the technology is amazing. So let me put you in the dark and then we'll bring you up into the light.
Okay,
So
thank
to
you.
start you where we've been, it's okay, say maybe you've got a large monolithic application, like everything's in one code base, it's massive. You've had developers in and out of this thing for 25 years. And of course, the majority of them put a single little comment at the top. You have no idea what a lot of this code does. And so you're stuck, right? Of how do I interpret what somebody else did? How do I make changes without screwing it up? How do I it's really, really hard to make those updates. And maybe it didn't matter until roughly 2020, where we saw these systems start to not be able to scale because of the demand, right? All of a sudden we ran into, oh no, what do we do? We have to do something with this old code. What we had to do in the past is either break it into pieces and make it talk to each other through little pockets of code, right? And then maybe we can update each pocket of code individually, which is fine as an effort to prioritize which pieces we want to upgrade to new code. That's great. But what we found is just without the comments, without necessarily understanding the old and new language to the point of skills, how do you do that? And it takes an enormous amount of time. The introduced features that I'm starting to see from AI are select the code, right click it, click the refactor button, and tell it what you want refactored. Do you want new libraries? Do you want maybe a different method included that you weren't able to use 20 years ago? Or do you want it in a completely different language? Tell me what language you want it in, and AI will spit it out for you. Now, there's human validation involved here, but this is the road we're on. And it's not pie in the sky, it's there. Like I can do this today on small scale. So think about like the impact of something like that on what's been traditionally a non-conversational discussion, right? Like it's done. We can't even talk about this. It's impossible. Suddenly the art of the possible is here. And I think it's going to change how we work.
Well, that's an amazing uh, kind of opens the field up for state employees, where you're empowering existing state employees to understand what they've got in a different way, and leveraging the tech talent you do have. Instead of
Yeah.
complaining about what you don't have, you're giving them potentially tools to leverage what you have for greater public service.
Yeah, yeah, and
Jen,
Russell, to your point, just real quick to your point,
yeah.
the same thing that we're talking about here is not just for the productivity side. Like, don't think of it all as just what AI is doing for you, but it's also educational. A lot of what AI brings to the table today is kind of like what you would do with Chat GPT, right? Hey, tell me about this. We can do that with code. We can do that with vulnerabilities. We can do that with other things that become almost like just in time training on how to do what you want to do. So we're upskilling and up leveling everybody who's trying to do that development while creating the code. And I think that's key here, right? So we're not making people just be reliant on AI, but we're also upskilling them so they know better how to poke AI to get exactly what they want back, or have AI help them deliver what they're looking to deliver. I think that's a really important piece.
So, Jen, when I think about this in state employment, if you had someone in state employment who was curious, one of our listeners or something, and they played around with a little bit, but they were looking at doing a deeper dive. Do those opportunities exist for sort of bridging the .com and the .gov for developers to just share, or what's the venue or format in state government for that to happen?
So there are communities of practice around development, around AI, where Department A and Department B will talk to each other and share lessons learned and best practices. What I love about these types of systems is they really are kind of user grown and user directed in a lot of ways. I mean, everything that GitLab does is transparent, in the open. I have never once had to ask these guys for something, because if I know how to Google and I know how to navigate their website, it's all there and open for you. I mean, Joel talked about how the platform has really expanded over time. And Joel, I know that a lot of that was user directed or even user enabled in a lot of instances. So there is the opportunity not just to poke around and see what these tools can do for you, but what you can do and share with the communities that also use these tools.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, we've had user contributions for years to the code base, to the documentation, right? It's a very open and transparent thing. And on the topic of AI today, you know, one of the things we brought out that we think is going to be table stakes going forward is an AI transparency center. It's a statement on how do you view AI? How do you apply it? What models are you using? What's the data that we can retain or use from you? The answer is none, by the way. What is the ethics that you're taking as a stance behind what you're doing, right? And then for each and every application of AI within a feature perspective, like each feature out of, say, 20 that we might have delivered, what's the model you're using? What's the engine you're using? Who developed this stuff? So those are the kind of things that are going to have a lot of question marks behind them as we move forward as to what is AI transparency. And I love that. That's one area that I'm really proud to be at GitLab. We're setting the bar high for this.
I think that will be one of the most used features in government, especially where government prides itself on transparency. And we're seeing that play out as AI is coming into practice in state departments and agencies. Yep, you can use AI, but you have to disclose everything that goes into that AI, because the public wants to be protected from bias or discrimination in any of these models. So I think that really is going to be a game changer as far as how AI is implemented in governments, because that transparency, that open source is something that government values a ton. And it's definitely going to be still in place for AI.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to me. I when I read some of the transparency and I hear you talking about it, and maybe it's easier in the code development world, but we'll use AI uh, in in scheduling the meetings for guests on the podcast. When we edit this video, uh, it'll be AI assisted because of the program that we're using. It automatically does some of that. Uh, is the transcript that we generate from the audio. We will take this and create show notes, and then social media and blog post, and so much content that AI will assist with. Where at what point is the disclosure, or is the disclosure so embedded in everything we're doing that it becomes a meaningless? Yes, of course you used AI in the development of this, because it's not possible to produce anything without AI touching it in some way. What's the meaning? Has maybe, and maybe this is unfair to the guest, but uh, is there a meaningful threshold for disclosure? Like, what do we mean when we say disclosure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It,
think there's a lot. Go
It's
ahead,
going
Jeff.
to vary, really. Where the state of California is going is putting out definitions of generative AI. And you're right, Russell, we use AI all over the place right now. And that really isn't necessarily what the state is trying to have transparency into. The state wants to know when you're using generative AI.
Got it.
And first things first, that has to be defined, right? And as it stands right now, there's different definitions for it all over the place. So, first of all, defining that, and then putting the path of least resistance in place to be able to implement it in government departments is something that a tool like GitLab could certainly be helpful with, but more importantly, a tool that's going to give a lot of guidance to state employees right now who maybe aren't using it because they're afraid of it or they don't know if it meets the rules. It's, I don't understand it, I'm hands off, it is where unfortunately a lot of public servants are at right now.
Yeah, that's true. And we see, bans of it in certain environments and then not in others, and encouragement to use it, but here's the warnings. And I actually find myself watching not only the US, like at large, like the agencies and the federal government productions on AI documentation, but globally following along with a lot of the guidance that's coming out right now, because a lot of it has a commonality to it that I think is going to come into it, a responsible use of AI best practice across the entire globe at some point. So, anything from the UN, the European Union, Australia, like I'm watching all these things roll in, and there's a lot of commonality there. But you're right, Jen, we're just not to the point where everything is synced. And until we get there, I think we're finally exiting the era of what I call the Wild West AI into something that's got more structure to it. But the regulations, a lot of them have end dates that are not till the end of 2024 or something like that, right? And so we still have to be pretty careful as to what we're adopting and what we're adopting it for, especially in the generative AI world.
And maybe we can wrap it up with this kind of question. But as an experienced coder, 500,000 lines of code, can you look at a piece of code and know whether it was Gen I created, if it's in Python coding language, if it's in C+, or do you know by looking at it right away? Is there a plagiarism detector in coding language?
So depends on how things are trained, but realistically, you shouldn't have to worry about a plagiarism detector. It should come out in a contextually viable way. And what I mean by that is you can ask generative AI 10 different times for the same code and you may get different responses, right? It's non-deterministic today is what the term is for that. And so as such, I think it's really hard to say, yes, that is AI code unless it's somehow labeled as generated by AI with GitLab, with, tool X. So
Right.
that's to me something that is it's harder to know right now, and it's part of why we're looking so much into watermarking for graphics and things like that. Like, how do we get there from here? It's not real clear. So what's interesting is it's harder to do in the coding environment, but it's fairly easy to do if you're using it for social media, resume services, or the like. We can
Right.
pick up on that pretty quick already. So I think there is a question about long term, what is educating these models? And as they continue to grow over time, will things start to look the same across code bases? Or what will AI contribute to development within a certain context or a certain environment once we get there? We're just not there right now.
Well, I want to thank you for lending your expertise to me and to our audience. We look forward to seeing more of this development, seeing more of GitLab in state government. And thanks again for your time.
Well, thank you very much.